Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everybody, it's Debbie Potts, and I'm doing a new episode of video and audio for the Whole Athlete Podcast to teach you how to fuel, train, and perform better for life and sports. And today I have a very special mentor to me in a roundabout way, Dr. James Wilson of the Adrenal Fatigue Solutions. And Dr. Wilson, thanks for coming on the show today. I'm waiting a year to get you back on.
It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and you guys can go to YouTube, the Whole Athlete podcast page on YouTube, and listen and watch us, as well as on iTunes and other podcast subscriptions. You can find the Whole Athlete podcast. But I really wanted to talk to Dr. Wilson today about his book that if you haven't read yet, it really was inspiration to me as we were actually required to read it in our nutritional therapy practitioner program I finished last year. And I think it's every athlete should read it, because if you've hopefully already read my book, Life is Not a Race, I had a lot of the Dr. Wilson website information on there. And it's just stuff that, we need to get out there. And you have specialized your practice on adrenal fatigue and helping educate other practitioners as well as helping clients yourself. So tell us a little bit kind of what brought you here real quick, and then we'll dive into my many questions I have.
Yeah. What brought me to where?
To being specializing in adrenal fatigue.
Well, actually, my patients had to teach me about that. And so I had people that had this mysterious tiredness that I couldn't figure out. I certainly wasn't taught about it. And I went to my mentors, and they said, well, it might be their adrenals, it might be thyroid, And so I checked further, and I started reading. And so I found some old text written in 1910, 1917, that gave me some real clues about it. And they said it sounded like the adrenals. So I started doing what I knew to treat the adrenals that time. That was, it's 1978. So that was a long time ago. And, they started getting better. I can't believe it actually worked. And it didn't work all the way, but it worked part of the way. And it was more of the way than I had, and it was more help than anybody else could get me. So I just kept working at it. And then as a doctor, you find that when you start thinking about it, concentrating about something, you start drawing patients that have that need. Mm-hmm. It's something the universe seems to provide to both the patients and the doctors. So I started getting these people that were had what later I named adrenal fatigue. And remember, I'm practicing at this point about 60 miles northwest of Toronto in a village of 6,000 called Fergus, Ontario, where it's mainly farmers and pig farmers and mixed grain farmers, old order Mennonites, a real mixture, certainly not a lot of athletes. And as I started developing a practice, then I did start getting athletes from Toronto, and they were coming up from Detroit and Buffalo and other places like that. And they had burned themselves out. So how I got the athlete was really two things. One is athletes that have been injured and told they couldn't compete anymore, or they couldn't do their sport anymore. And athletes that have burned themselves out and were wondering, trying to find a remedy for what was wrong with them. And they got the most ridiculous diagnoses from their doctors and the most ridiculous type of help. So I really feel sorry for a lot of the athletes that are out there. Thank goodness we have sports physicians now, and they're a little bit more up to date on what needs to be done. But boy, these people suffered. So we, little by little started putting a program together and started getting them back. And so it just happens that the athlete is oftentimes their own worst enemy. They burn themselves out, and they don't know they're doing it because they think harder is better, and you have to, no pain, no gain. And that ends up not being the way that you really build a strong body and an athletic body. That rest is really an important part of that, and what you put into your nutrient intake. is more important than the average person, because the average athlete, especially a dedicated athlete, is going to burn up a lot more calories. They're going to excrete nutrients. They're going to sweat out nutrients, micronutrients like zinc and copper and manganese, that chromium that are excreted normally in the urine the harder you exercise. Those have to be replaced. And remember, some of those are involved in homeostasis, in the blood sugar relationship, in making insulin. You need zinc, manganese, chromium, and vanadium in order to make insulin. You need vanadium at the endpoints and niacin in order to activate the insulin receptors. Then, of course, we've got the adrenals, and they need so many different nutrients, but especially they need a lot of niacin because they're all NAD and NADPH pathways. They're all P450 pathways. So I hope that's not over the head of a lot of your athletes, but
the detox pathways you're mentioning,
and the energy producing pathways.
Yeah.
And the adrenal cascade on how to the adrenals produce over 50 hormones, and they go to almost every part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So when they go down, the athlete goes down. And the more the athlete tries to push themselves, the harder it is on the adrenals to try to recover, because they don't get any slack. They're pushed at work, they're pushed at play. And there's no place safe that's for the adrenal glands until the people finally get some wisdom and some understanding, like you're trying to give to your athletes, about rest is an important part of recovery, and it's also an important part of being an athlete.
And I think that's becoming a little bit more popular way of thinking for coaching athletes. And I was just in Ironman World Championship in Kona, just trying to network and promote the podcast that teach people life is not a race, and get them more education about sympathetic dominance for athletes, and how to improve performance is, train hard, but recover harder, and how important that is on top of nutrition, but just getting the right recovery. And what we've been talking about lately is sympathetic dominance and testing heart rate variability and have resiliency to go parasympathetic. So learning more about the nervous system and how often we get stuck over in that sympathetic. We're not able to shift back and forth. So we have part of this adrenal HPA axis dysregulation, but it's going to impact, like you said, all of our hormones and then also our organs. And I think, getting into what I brought this sheet over with me to Kona when I was working on just talking to people, and just how the chronic effects of, these charts at chronically high cortisol, here are the impacts. Just like, look at this, people. And then that really helps kind of going, oh my gosh, so I got this, that. So what I wanted to kind of start with a little bit about how the stress response, how it relates to blood sugar, and how the pancreas, adrenals, and the liver are impacted. But the stress response, we talked before, every stress response is a blood sugar response. We can touch on that a little bit and how that can lead to insulin resistance, even if we're eating a low carb, higher fat, healthy food diet plan.
Okay, blood sugar is one of the keys to energy, as we know, blood glucose, because blood glucose has to get into the cells and has to feed the brain in order to make ATP, which is the energy of the cell. So it's the main currency of the cell, is the energy, and that's ATP. So how the adrenals are involved with that is there's something called gluconeogenesis, which is making new blood glucose from the usually liver and skeletal muscle. And the adrenals are essential for that. In other words, you need cortisol in order to stimulate gluconeogenesis. So let me take you back. When you start to exercise, or when you have stress, or when you have stress, you need more energy. If it's stress, you need to know whether you're going to fight or flight. Your brain needs more energy. It needs to figure out what's going to happen. When you're an athlete, you need it more for your physical endurance and for the different mechanisms that have to happen when you're exercising. So as the blood sugar is used up by the cells, then the blood sugar starts to drop. And that's an indication for the adrenals then to go to the liver and skeletal muscle and create more energy. And it does that by, first of all, unlocking glycogen. Now, glycogen is simply stored sugar, and it's simply two glucose molecules stuck on the end of each other. And once cortisol is needed to break that, and once cortisol is used to break those apart, that becomes 2 glucose molecules. And so that's the first stage of giving more energy into the blood, is breaking the glucose down into becoming blood glucose. The glycogen down and becoming blood glucose. And then we have the second stage, as the glycogen has been broken down and it's gone into the cells now as glucose, is now being burned as energy to make the ATP. We now need another source of blood sugar. And so that's where gluconeogenesis comes in, to start converting fatty acids and peptides into blood sugar to keep this cycle going, to feed it. Now, how is blood sugar going to get into the cells? We got to have insulin. Insulin is the key that unlocks the cell to put the blood sugar into the cell to make the ATP. And so we've got to have all these things working together. The pancreas has to make enough insulin, the adrenals have to make enough cortisol, and their blood sugar has to be sufficient in order for there to be enough ATP for you to carry on. Now, if you don't, then of course, as you start to get into this oxygen debt, then you're going to get, then instead of making pyruvic acid, you're going to make lactic acid. It's going to build up soreness. And that's simply because you lack oxygen. And also you probably lack pantothenic acid, because pantothenic acid has to start the Krebs cycle inside that blood, and to make that blood glucose into nice ATP for you. So you've got to have a lot of nutrients. You start burning them up. As you exercise, you burn up more nutrients. As you're under stress, you burn up more nutrients. And those nutrients are being burned to, one, make the adrenal cascade work like it's supposed to, and second, in the cell to convert those molecules into energy from blood sugar. So there's a very intimate relationship with this. Mm-hmm. And then it's fortified somewhat by testosterone and by several other hormones that help work this out. It's a really complex, but just beautiful. Nature designed us so well, Debbie.
I know, that's why I try to explain to people that, if you have, like I have liver problems now, detoxification and breaking down fat, and pancreas because of insulin and all of that, build up a little bit of insulin resistance and blood sugar issues, blood sugar dysregulation because of the adrenal dysregulation, that they're all connected. And what's frustrating to me and a lot of people that just can't get help is that, what do people do if they don't feel good? They go to the doctor and they don't get anywhere, because none of the labs that they're getting are really showing any of that. So I think, getting someone as a practitioner, nutritional therapy practitioner, and someone trained in the Wilson formula and learning how to heal that is so crucial, because like I said, I've, 5 years from when I started to have problems, it's now other organs that are dysfunctional because of your adrenals. I think, like you said in the beginning, if you keep on pushing yourself, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're endurance racing and triathlons, but just what I wrote about my book, that we're all so busy every day and we just don't stop living life as a race, that we're just so busy that I think we have chronic stress externally, but also internally as well. So I think it's just a big area we need to dive into more, that the relationship of the adrenals to the liver and the pancreas, as well as the next question is on our gut health. Our immune system is in the gut. So if we can move into the next question, is if stress is on, immune system is dampened or turned off a little more. So talk about what your opinion is on that section.
Okay, well, first of all, you talked about the gut. 50% of your immune system lies within 2 inches of your gut. So that we have the immune system is ready to handle any invaders that might get in through the gut. And so that's one of the reasons why food allergies are present, is because the immune system is reacting to little holes in the intestinal tract that food substances are able to get through, called leaky gut syndrome. And the immune system will attack it because it doesn't have a self marker. Everybody in every cell in your body has a cell marker called a self marker. And it's for you and you only. So if you don't have a self marker, your immune system will attack it. It doesn't care whether it's broccoli, apples, or an invader from Mars. It's going to attack it. Now, it attacks protein based substances worse than it does the others. But almost anything, if it doesn't have a self marker, it's going to be attacked by your immune system. Now, cortisol important in this whole regulation. There's something called Th1, Th2 regulation in the immune system. And what happens is there's two major aspects to the immune system. There's what they call the cellular immune system, which does the cell-to-cell combat. Actually goes out and attacks the baddies by latching onto them and sucking the life out of them and spewing acids on them and destroying them. It's really vicious. And then there's the other part called the humoral immune system, and it's not quite as vicious, it's not quite as powerful, and it secretes the antibodies. And so that's why they're called antibodies. They're not part of your body, so it secretes antibodies. And so when we find that as people get under more and more stress and cortisol starts to be elevated, then the immune system, through cortisol and some other factors, can't act as strongly as they would like to. So instead of the cellular immune system coming in and gobbling up these baddies and getting rid of them, what happens is it takes more of a back seat and allows the antibodies to be secreted by another part of the immune system called B cells. And they don't do as strong a job. So you can have a bacteria or a virus or a spirochete or a number of different things living in your system for months or more because your cortisol levels have been too high or too low. See, the interesting thing about cortisol is if it gets too high, it shuts down your immune system. It's too low, then your immune system can't be activated by the cortisol. And so it has to be within this range in order for your immune system to function optimally. Every one of your 5 major type of white blood cells have thousands of cortisol receptor sites on each one of their cells. So you need the cortisol to stimulate your immune system to be active. But if the cortisol is overactive, that happens with, especially with endurance athletes and extreme athletes, cortisol tends to be way up before it goes down. You can get such high cortisol levels, it can start to shrink your thymus gland, which is really important for immunity, or the lymph nodes in your body. Really, really important not to stress that because that could be heavy deficiencies in immunity. So either low or high cortisol can be damaging to your immune system, but cortisol itself is extremely important for an immune system to create it and keep its function.
Yeah, so you're not saying cortisol anything is good or bad. It's just in the right amounts, like cholesterol. You know, you need it. It's not good or bad, too much or too little. It's the right amount that your body needs.
Exactly.
So, excuse me. So the food allergies was part of that. Your gut health, I think, is so important because you get a lot more because your immune system's down. So you're more have gut inflammation, leaky gut, and then we lead to food allergies. But then that's also another source of stress. So we always talk about the beaker of stress that comes in your body. Your brain doesn't know what that stress is, if it's from, financial stress or, you had a bad day at work or you did a really long, hard race or workout, that it could be stress from all different things. But now we're starting to get, if I have parasite infection in my gut and I'm eating food I'm allergic to suddenly, even if it's like apples and dairy or something, just food that you have, and then suddenly those are enemies, you're just causing another source of stress to your body. So it's really hard.
And it's also another place that cortisol has to go, because remember, cortisol is also the hormone that puts out the fires. It's the greatest anti-inflammatory in your body. So whether we're talking about joint inflammation, or we're talking about muscle inflammation, or we're talking about gut inflammation, any kind of inflammation or irritation, cortisol has to be called to the scene of the accident or to the fire. And it has to do what it can to quell the fire. So that's leukotrienes, it's cyclooxygenases, it's bradykinins, it's inflammation in your guts, IgGs, IgEs. You've got all these different things that cortisol has to help handle. So the more you can take antioxidants, good quality antioxidants, the more you can have food that has antioxidants in it, anti-inflammatory properties, then the easier you make it on the adrenals, and they don't have to secrete so much cortisol in order to bring all this under control. And sometimes, unfortunately, Debbie, cortisol isn't enough. If someone's not taking care of themselves, I'm an extreme athlete and I'm living on jujubes and Tootsie Bars, then there's only so much you can do, right? You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And so there's only so much with all the nutrients that are required for the adrenals to do their job, and someone's not eating well. They're not even breathing like they're supposed to, like they don't take deep breaths, and they don't treat their body with respect and get enough sleep and enough play. then the poor adrenals can't respond. They get too weak because they're under too much stress in themselves to try to help a stressful body.
And that's what we talk about. What I term the holistic method is 8 elements to really be healthy as an athlete or anyone, but happiness is one of them. And we're actually doing a podcast with a naturopath from Kona. Well, I asked him what topic he wanted to talk about. He said, happiness, it's such a key part, because I think happiness, if you're not happy, it's real. I was trying to think, what's the opposite of happiness? If it's depression or what it is, but it just is related a lot. I have people that come to me that have probably adrenal issues, but they're depressed. So that's actually kind of segue to another topic is how's our brain health, our depression and our brain fog and feeling anxious or feeling down and depressed related to adrenal issues?
Yes, and remember that if you have both high or low adrenal fatigue, it can produce a fairly mild and not so mild depression. And the amazing thing about this is the antidepressants typically don't work with people with adrenal fatigue. They can have the depression. When they take the antidepressants, they usually either don't work or they make them worse. It's one of the ways that I've learned to determine if someone has a thyroid issue that can also cause depression, or adrenal, which is more common. Then if they try to take an antidepressant, it usually doesn't work. But if they go to something like 5-HTP, or they also start taking the proper adrenal supplements, then they'll notice usually as little as 3 weeks, but sometimes it might take 5 or 6 for them to notice that not only that depression is going away, but a lot of the other subtle signs and symptoms they were having, they didn't even realize they were suffering from, start to mitigate. And then they start feeling more like themselves and everything. So the depression is only a part of, it's like the tail of the dog. It's not the dog. And so it's only a part of that whole symptom picture of having low cortisol or occasionally high cortisol that causes that depressive symptoms. One of the ways you can tell it, it'll usually be worse in the morning and in the mid-afternoon. So they'll notice there's almost always with adrenal fatigue, there's almost always a morning fatigue, and there's always a mid-afternoon fatigue. And so if the fatigue is just constant all through the day, that's probably not adrenal fatigue. But if it's cyclic, that's more indication that the adrenals are involved, because the adrenals work on the cyclic diurnal pattern.
Yeah. I had someone that reached out to me for help once, and he felt in the afternoons, he'd always get really tired and would eat something, and he'd be driving home from work and be falling asleep, and it just had nothing in there to give him energy. And caffeine wasn't going to be helping, or having sugar. But people are trying to figure out what's wrong. It's like, you go to a doctor and they give you antidepressant pills and anxiety pills, and they think that's what they have to do to get better. It's really sad.
Yeah.
So
we don't really train our physicians to treat people. They just I don't know where it went wrong, but it's so much wiser to treat comprehensively, not just to try to treat the tip of the iceberg.
Well, I was talking to your staff today, we're talking on the phone to your office, and, we're all passionate about the same topic. So it's fun. I was talking to them that, it's finding what we're looking for, all working on is finding the root cause. Is like, why do I have these symptoms? Let's figure out what it's coming from. If it's your HPA axis, your adrenals, if it's your liver is not detoxifying, what we need to support and strengthen, and not just, put a Band-Aid on something. So that's why I love your information you have on your website, which we'll put on the show notes and say at the end of the show. But just to go into the next question a little bit, you talked about it already, but inflammation in the athlete, I think, you talked about that. So I don't know if we have any more to add to that. And then
Yeah, I do, just a little bit. Yeah. Vitamin C is very important in this. And so one of our supplements is a special C that's formulated for stress. But vitamin C is very important in helping the inflammation in the long-term recovery. And
for good recovery.
Yeah, because it helps regenerate coenzyme Q10. It helps regenerate vitamin E. It in itself can regenerate with enough niacin to some degree, but typically about 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C is necessary for the body, and especially for the athlete, might want to kick it up to 25 or 3,000. When we, as you know, most animals can make their own vitamin C except for guinea pigs and humans. And the average animal, if they were our size, would make between 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. So on the athlete, they need to be attendant to that and keep it at least at that form. And you want to kind of see the sustained release and pH balance. Because if you don't, people with adrenal fatigue and people with stress and athletes tend to be acidic. And vitamin C is acidic. So if they just take a regular vitamin C, then all it does is cause them to have to take the spare calcium and magnesium, for which there's usually no spare. People often operate on empty with those two nutrients, and they have to pull it out of the body to balance the acidity of the regular ascorbic acid that's sold as vitamin C. And so they're really kind of beating their head against the wall with this. 72% of North Americans are deficient in magnesium. Yeah. And so if we already have a deficiency of magnesium and you got to use this magnesium to help balance your vitamin C, then it's a really difficult balance for your body to ever make. So the extra vitamin C and which vitamin C you choose is really important, especially for the athlete.
For sure. I keep hearing, especially cold season, you want to boost your immune system. As we said, you're dampening that immune system with chronic stress that from our training and from our living life, that adding more vitamin C this time of year seems to be beneficial. Zinc and magnesium, especially for the overtraining athlete or overdoer in life.
And it's especially true when you're trying to recover, because one of the things that vitamin C does is it helps lay the scar tissue down along the lines of stress. And if you don't have adequate vitamin C, it'll heal in a patchwork pattern, and it won't heal along the lines of stress. So it's very easy to get limited joint movement or scar tissue around the ligaments, so that you don't get full extension, or the tendons. You don't get full recovery if you don't have enough vitamin C in the healing phase.
So with thyroid, I always hear a lot of clients, I own a fitness studio in Bellevue, Washington, and I don't know, most every female seems to have low thyroid and they're on thyroid medication. What are your thoughts on thyroid and how it could be related to adrenal issues?
Well, first of all, living where you're living, we want to make sure those women have 3,000 to 4,000 international units of vitamin D a day, because those are both critical in thyroid and adrenal issues. We want to make sure that they have enough iodine in their system, because thyroid uses a lot of iodine. But like the adrenals, the thyroid also needs a lot of minerals. And so both the adrenals and the thyroid share several minerals that they need to have in order to help themselves. And they're very intimately involved. The adrenals and the thyroid are very intimately involved. Seattle, which isn't too far from you, has the highest caffeine consumption of anywhere in America. And of course, then that's a net zinc excreter, along with some of the other minerals. And for about half to 2/3 of the people, it's also taxing on the adrenal glands. And when the adrenals go down, then an interesting thing that your listeners may not know is that the adrenals are necessary to make proper thyroid hormone. You need TSA. In order for TSH to properly be made and released, you need cortisol. In order for the inactive T4 to be converted to the active T3, you need cortisol. And then at the receptor sites for the thyroid on the cell that the thyroid's going to be active, the thyroid receptor is needed for thyroid hormone to act on, you need cortisol to be on that receptor sites. And if you don't have enough cortisol, it can decrease thyroid activity by as much as 50% on that receptor site. So adrenal hormones, especially cortisol, are very important in proper thyroid function. As a matter of fact, the Rhoda Barnes Foundation, which is a foundation dedicated just to hypothyroidism, says when you have a thyroid problem, look first at the adrenals, treat the adrenals, and then if you still have the thyroid problem, treat the thyroid.
That's good to hear. I never hear that from many places. So let's dive into what's really been helping me the last few months after 5 years of trying to heal my adrenals, is what I came across after doing a nutritional therapy program, combining what we learned working with a nutritional therapy practitioner with your supplements you've created based on your experience working for how many years with people with adrenals. And you're talking about all these nutrients we need, these minerals and vitamins and glandulars. Let's kind of talk a little bit about the last few minutes we have together to talk about the Wilson formula and how you came about that, and tell us what ones you suggest for athletes and to look into it.
Sure. By the time I had a good handle on treating these people with this low adrenal problem that we didn't really have a name for at the time, they were sometimes taking 25 to different nutrients, different bottles.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to have a chart, take this at this time, don't take this at this time, don't take this with this, take this before bedtime. And it was nuts. And they would come in and say, it's too complicated, I can't follow it. So I sat down one day and I spent, 1 year. And I decided we had to make this easier. So I came up with 4 different things that they had to have, and I was able to get them the 4 supplements. And what were those 4 things? Had to have, first of all, something that was going to give their energy back, something that was going to help give the nutrients to the adrenal cascade so it can make the proper hormones like it's supposed to, something that was going to work inside the cells to make the proper ATP like it needed to. And that was something that's now called supraadrenal stress formula. But then on people that had medium or severe adrenal fatigue, they also needed something called adrenal rebuilder because the cell, in my opinion, had been damaged. And I needed the raw materials for that cell. And I realized that there were some cases, I especially learned this from my postpartum depression adrenal fatigue patients, that the HPA axis was sometimes disturbed and seemed to be damaged. So I included 4 different glandular products. There was the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal for the HPA axis. And then I also found if I added some orchid compound that it worked better on both men and women. And those 4 then, that's when I started seeing this really deep recovery. That's when I saw the repair starting to happen. And then I said, does the world need another vitamin C? There's already a zillion on there. And I struggled for 2 years before I finally said, yep, it does. Because I need something that was pH balanced like we were talking about before. I needed something sustained release because it's a water-soluble vitamin. And if you don't sustain release it, it'll simply go in and go out of your system. The kidneys will pee it out right away. So I needed something that's going to stay in the system and be elevated slowly. And also I needed several things in addition. I needed the bioflavonoids that appear in nature with vitamin C. And also I needed the trace minerals that are needed inside the cell. That the magnesium, manganese, zinc, and copper for the superoxide dismutases, and also some, with a supraadrenal stress formula, I have something called, it's a special kind of iron. Sorry, I can't think of it. But anyway, iron for catalase. So we needed something for the superoxide dismutases, both in the mitochondria and in the cytosol of the cell. We needed these trace minerals, and they had to be easily absorbed. So the whole thing is about how much, how absorbed it is, has to be perfectly balanced. So I was able to get that with Adrenal C. And then the final thing was a 4-herb combination to balance this HPA axis so that it would stay in harmony during the whole day, help people sleep at night, help them keep balance during the day. So there's one to rebuild the gland. There was one to provide the nutrients for the adrenal cascade. There was a special vitamin C to help them get the vitamin C they need because the adrenals burn up more vitamin C than any other organ or gland. And then something to balance the HPA axis. And those 4 things we call the adrenal quartet. But those 4 things were, once I put those 4 together, that's when it says, oh, I finally got it. And now, 15 years later, I can tell you for sure, if someone takes these for 6 to 8 weeks and they're not responding, something else is going on in their system. Something is holding down the adrenals and keeping it from healing. They're missing something because it's so reliable time after time after time. One of the athletes I had with triathlon, he came to me, it's been about 6 years ago, and he says, I was a doctor, I'm thinking about closing my practice. And I said, don't. And I told him what to do. And he says, I'll try it. I said, you know what? These aren't designed to be taken forever. They're designed to be taken for 1 to 2 years. And after that, your body should heal. And he said, I'll try it. He came back to me 2 years. I was lecturing in New Zealand, and he was in New Zealand. And he said, you remember me, the poster boy for adrenal fatigue? I said, yeah. He says, well, not only did I not close my practice, but I'm now back into triathlon training. I'm 54 years old. I'm breaking all the records at 54. I'm going to break all the records at 55. And I said, how do you know? He says, because I'm already 54 and a half, almost 55, and I'm already breaking all the records now. I'm going to really wipe up 55 because I'm getting better and better and better. So 2.5 years ago, he was going to quit. He was going to quit life. 2.5 years later, he's breaking records because he's got his body fixed again. And the adrenals do heal, and people can get benefit from it. And this isn't the kind of thing you do forever. Use that 2 years to get your lifestyle together, get your breathing down, get all the nutrients you need to keep your body into full health. And then you keep them handy if you need them again. But they're not designed to do forever. They're fine. It doesn't hurt you. It's just they're designed to heal, not just a Band-Aid treatment for something.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope I'm that success story. I've been, great, but I just can't, get my endurance back up and to run, and my body's still not able to build that endurance up. So everyone else used to ask me, when's your next race? And it's been a few years, but I'm still wanting to race. My body just isn't there yet. So I think you just need to be patient and stick with your protocol. And I felt difference in 2 weeks. I could feel so much energy during the day, not feel as tired. And I do admit, I went to Europe for a couple-week vacation. Like, I don't want to lug all that stuff with me, so I didn't take anything with me. And I came back and I felt kind of tired, and I feel like I went backwards this week, but now I'm back, just taking them and got my new order in. So I appreciate everything you've done and put all your experience into these bottles, because as I've said, it's been a long haul for me, and trying to educate everyone on the show and our listeners that life is not a race, and we need to slow down and pace the whole us, the whole you from the inside out, that you don't want to have what's, I've been struggling with for so many years to get better. And I still love to race, and I love training, and I love getting out there, and it's so fun to be a part of a community. But you have to learn how to find that right amount, how much you can tolerate before you go that tipping point that you're going to cause this chronic stress. And I don't think it's the training and the racing. I think it's for me personally, it's my busyness the rest of the day, because my bike is actually a relaxing time for me. So my personal stress is from, financial stress or managing people and running a business. It's just life stress. I think we all have to learn how to, like you said, pause. And I'm telling people to, reset, push that button to just stop and breathe. And I think we just get caught up in things, and you have to stop, reset, take some deep breaths in and really long exhales, and just recalibrate a little bit more often every day to not have to go through this.
Very good advice. Oh, I want to mention too, we have a special for your listeners. If they want to
that's right.
Websites. We have 2 websites. One's adrenalfatigue.org, ADRENALFATIGUE.org. And the other is drwilsons.com, DRWILSONS.com. And if you go there, when you get to the checkout and you see the code box, if you will type in
The Whole Athlete, I think she said.
The Whole Athlete. Thank you very much. The Whole Athlete. Then when you check out, it will apply a special discount to your people. And
great.
So we wanted to do that because we want to encourage athletes to really take care of themselves and to be inspired by what you're doing. And we wanted to do whatever we could to help them.
Well, thank you. We'll make sure we'll put that in the show notes too. And that's through the next 6 weeks after we have the show airs on November 7th. So that gives people during the holiday season, we tend to get stressed out. So we thank everyone for listening. And we thank you, Dr. Wilson, coming on. I wish I could take a pill to learn everything that you have up in your head. It's because all the information I got to get in my head so I can pass it along. But you're just filled with knowledge and years of experience. I appreciate you sharing everything you have learned, and your blogs and your videos and everything you have on your website. And for practitioners as well, it's an amazing resource for me, people like me who want to specialize in this area and help people avoid going through this. So thanks again for your time today. And hopefully I'm going to plan on coming down there and find you in Arizona and shadow the office.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, we have stoplights, running water now in Tucson.
That's right. You're in Tucson. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.